On Monday, the U.S. Supreme Court heard oral arguments in a case called Murthy v. Missouri regarding freedom of speech and government coercion of social media platforms to censor its users. If you may recall, a few months ago, stories came out, actually not just a few months ago, but a couple of years ago even, that the Biden administration was pressuring social media platforms like Facebook to flag content and also to censor posts by users on social media. This from the SCOTUS blog. The lawsuit before the Supreme Court on Monday stems from efforts by the Biden administration in 2021 to encourage companies to restrict misinformation about the COVID-19 vaccine, which, quite frankly, has come out to not be misinformation, but that's another story. But the challengers, two states with Republican attorneys general, Missouri and Louisiana, and several individuals whose social media posts were removed or downgraded, say that the government's efforts violate social media users' rights to free speech. Listen to some of this stuff because it's very disturbing. So in the case in Louisiana, a federal judge agreed with the challengers that federal officials had violated the First Amendment by coercing or significantly encouraging the content moderation decisions of social media platforms. U.S. District Judge Terry Doughty issued an order that limited communications between the White House and several other government agencies with social media platforms. It went up to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, and they narrowed the order from Judge Doughty to applying to a smaller number of group officials, but still upheld basically the decision. The U.S. government initially made the argument that the plaintiffs don't have standing. However, most of the argument, which is the crux of the case here, centered on the merits of the dispute, that is, whether the Biden administration's contacts with social media platforms violated the challengers' First Amendment rights. This is the part that's most disturbing, or, well, it's part of what's disturbing. A majority of the justices appeared concerned that the challengers' rule would sweep in too many government efforts to influence social media platforms, potentially prohibiting the government from acting to protect the public. I'd like to take a moment and refer you to a document known as the United States Constitution. In it, Amendment 1 says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. Please notice that it doesn't say except certain circumstances, except under emergencies, except when it is trying to protect the public. It just says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. That's it. There's no exceptions here. But I digress. Let's go back to the SCOTUS blog story. The U.S. solicitor arguing on behalf of the U.S. government described the government's efforts to influence social media platforms in this case as a classic example of the quote-unquote bully pulpit in which officials would speak their mind and call on the public to act. The Court of Appeals, he stressed, mistook persuasion for coercion. Efforts to persuade social media platforms across the line only when they convey a threat of adverse government action. Ladies and gentlemen, if somebody's calling you up from the White House and saying, we don't like that you're allowing these people to post, do they really need to make an overt threat for you to feel threatened? That they might come sniffing around and looking for a problem, or that you may face increased scrutiny? Do they have to really be overt? Does anybody honestly think that anybody in the government is actually going to come out and be overt with threats like that? The Louisiana Solicitor General, Benjamin Aguinaga, and I apologize, I know I butchered his name, countered that the government's levers of pressure are anathema to the First Amendment. Behind closed doors, he told the justices, the government badgers the platforms 24/7. It abuses them with profanity. It warns them that the highest levels of the White House are concerned. The Solicitor General, arguing on behalf of the White House, agreed with Aguinaga's characterization of the emails exchanged between the government officials and Facebook as constant pestering. And then he said he admitted that the emails were unusual, and then indicated that the idea that there would be a back and forth between government officials and social media platforms would not be unusual. And here's where it gets a little more interesting and a little more disturbing. Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Kagan, both of whom worked in the executive branch before becoming judges, appeared to agree with this characterization. Government PR people, said Kavanaugh, who served in the George W. Bush White House, so honorable, regularly call up the media and berate them. This is a sitting U.S. Supreme Court justice. And then another sitting U.S. Supreme Court justice, Kagan, who served in the Clinton administration, chimed in, telling Aguinaga that his argument appeared to be an extremely expansive one. Like Kavanaugh, she noted, I have some experience with encouraging press to suppress their own speech. I mean, she said, this literally happens thousands of times a day in the federal government. Well, you know what? It's not supposed to. And then apparently the Chief Justice chimed in and made a little joke that he had no experience coercing anybody, but he expressed skepticism about the challenger's theory, observing that the government is not monolithic. Really? Efforts by one part of the government to pressure social media platforms, he posited, could lead the platforms to seek help from another part of the government. And that has to dilute the concept of coercion significantly. No, that's complete and utter BS. And here is the part that made the news, and this should be quite concerning as well. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson outlined a hypothetical TikTok challenge involving teenagers jumping out of progressively higher windows, leading to serious injuries and even death. Could the government, she asked, call the platforms and say, this information that you are putting up on your platform is creating a serious public health emergency. We are encouraging you to take it down. And I believe Aguinaga's response to this was correct. Aguinaga agreed that the government could call the platforms to flag the TikTok challenge as a problem, but he added that the moment that the government tries to use its ability as the government and its stature as the government to pressure them to take it down, that is when you are interfering with the third party's speech rights. Now, what this article doesn't cover, and is highlighted in a Zero Hedge article on the same topic, what this really comes down to is Missouri v. Biden is about the government's efforts to coerce social media into censoring any and all voices that question official dogma. And specifically, this case is about birthing the new concept, new to America at least, known as misinformation. That is truth about what our government is doing that cannot be allowed to enter the public arena, making it very difficult for ordinary citizens to question authority. That's what this is really about. I agree. And here is the real kicker. Justice Ketanji Brown said, my biggest concern is that your view has the First Amendment hamstringing the government in significant ways. And they've included a post from X, Twitter, the handle System Update. That is quite literally the entire point of the First Amendment and of the entire Bill of Rights. Yes, that is the truth. And I'll end with this. In response to a question from Justice Kavanaugh, Mr. Aguinaga said the government is not helpless when it comes to countering factually inaccurate speech. Precedent before the court suggests the government can and should counter false speech with true speech, Mr. Aguinaga said. Censorship has never been the default remedy for perceived First Amendment violation.